Can you hear me now?
Yes, yes, yes,
Thank you.
yes, yes. I'm so excited.
I am so excited. You have no idea. Like, you were like a huge part of my commute for years. Like, I just, would always have stand up with Pete like on my XM radio for years. I don't have an XM anymore because a variety of things. I don't drive nearly as much as I used to, but like I just so many times I've wanted to call in. I never got through. And anyway, so I'm super fangirl here.
Wow, that is so hilarious to me. Like, it took me a minute to put the dots together, but I had seen your name a lot on Twitter. You were pretty active on social media, and I didn't put the dots together until some big name person fairly recently was like, donate to Pam Keith. I was like, wait, this Pam Keith is someone I know from social media who I know I like. And then I looked it up. I was like, she's running for okay. And I immediately emailed you, and here we are. I'm so excited to connect with you.
I'm so excited to be here. Not just with you, but with your audience, because you have such a super smart and thoughtful, but able to see humor in things. And it's just you always have really smart conversations about what's going on. And these days we have a lot of stupid conversations in politics. It's nice to have a smart one.
Yeah. Like, what are some books that have influenced your life? That's probably a weird question that nobody ever asks.
Very good question.
You have such a fascinating childhood and life and journey, fiction, nonfiction.
Okay, so I read a lot of James Baldwin, which I think has just been incredibly influential. I started reading James Baldwin. My dad actually knew James Baldwin.
What?
Yeah, it's a long story, but my father was a foreign service officer, and James spent a lot of time in Paris, and my dad was working in Paris at the time, and they kind of hung out and got to know each other. And my father, at the time, I was too young to appreciate what and all that was. I regret that tremendously now, but I didn't meet James, but my dad was always talking about him. And I eventually, somebody said something about, I saw a clip of James Baldwin speaking. If you've ever seen him speak, he has a kind of calm authoritativeness that is just mesmerizing. So I decided to start reading that right around like 1920. I was like, oh, I got to dig into this. So that was super influential to me. For the most part, though, and your audience will hate me for this, I use reading for escapism because I do so much reading for work.
And as a lawyer, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So I read voraciously to just pull myself out of the reality of this world.
So let us judge you on this horrible writer that you apparently love.
So I'm a hopeless romantic. I read a lot of romances, but I also love really smart crime mystery type stuff. And my favorite of all was The Girl with the Dragon Tattoo series, which I just thought was that the female protagonist in that, Lisbeth Salander, is like everything.
Well,
she just had to.
I'm not familiar with that. I've heard of it, but I haven't read nonfiction since I started hosting the show. I think probably for 15 years I haven't read nonfiction. It's kind of weird and almost reprehensible in a way. But I always feel like if I'm reading, I have to be reading something about policy or history or important consequential issues so I can be smarter. Not that I ever retain any of it, but anyway.
If you do like stuff like that, like history, I sometimes read like history. I love history. And so there's a book called How the Irish Saved Civilization. And it's a great history of how Christianity was kind of, destroyed on the main British Isles and kind of remained in Ireland, and a lot, when the fall of the Roman Empire happened and all that stuff. It was really Ireland's monks, these monasteries that kind of kept the Christian writings.
That sounds really fascinating. I don't know if you heard, because it just happened. Well, I just heard about it yesterday, but I played it on yesterday's podcast. You say how that book is How the Irish Saved Civilization. Did you hear that Eric Trump told a radio broadcaster that his dad, Donald Trump, saved Christianity? Did you hear that?
I hear that. And it absolutely boggles my mind that anybody in America believes this man is a Christian. Right. I mean, okay, you are a Christian by what you do, not just by what you say as a general principle.
Well said.
But he has to have a clue what's in the Bible. Like he is as clueless about the content of the Bible as he is about the Constitution. Like he has no
He was asked like in a campaign, I forget by who, John Heilman, Mark Halpern, I think it was, which are you, an Old Testament, a New Testament guy? And he was like, listen, they're both great. There's
Fabulous. They're both fabulous. I love them both. They're great. It's like, I just read them all. Like it's like the male 2.0 version of Sarah Palin. I just read them all. I read everything. I read it all. I'm like, okay, so give us an example. All of them. All
the
that
newspapers, right?
I read them
That's
all.
funny. That's
It's like
we should compare him more to Sarah Palin. I think she's probably a lot smarter than he is in a lot of ways.
She's to blame for where we are. If we're wanting to be honest,
she's a big contributor, and so
no,
is
no.
I think
she's the agent number one. Because
how do you figure?
Because prior to Sarah Palin, the Republican Party establishment was cognizant of the Rush Limbaugh type, interest, the Robert Downey Jr. A lot of folks probably don't know who that guy is. He was a shock jock. And there was a movement kind of building around that, but it never gained acceptance in the sort of intelligentsia of the Republican Party. It just never did. And it never got entree into sort of mainstream Republican, structural party structure. And then when Sarah Palin got brought in to sort of breathe some diversity life into John McCain's campaign, they legitimized not just her, but all of her followers, and it just legitimized this entire worldview. And the worldview that she put into mainstream Republicanism was, there are real Americans, and then there are all these other people who are not real Americans, which the moment I heard it, I knew that was code for, white Christian people are real Americans and everybody else is an interloper. Now, there are a lot of folks who already believe that, but that was not something any mainstream Republican would ever say publicly, and certainly would challenge and push back had they been confronted with that. But when Palin did it, she did it at this, speech in Midwest somewhere. I'm so glad to be around real Americans. And a few people, including me, and I think even you commented on this at the time, Pete, if I recall correctly, was like, what the hell is that? What is a real American and what is not a real American? But see, that foretold to me where this is all going. And because of her, a lot of people with that mindset started to infiltrate the Republican Party from the bottom up. That was already starting to happen, but it got even more energy and momentum. So what happened is some of these Palinites started to take over party control at the county level, at the municipal level. And so all of a sudden they pushed in these really extreme elements. And that's why those extreme elements were able to push even more radical candidates across the line. And that's why we are where we are. We are here today because of a political stunt that was pulled by some campaign staffers who thought it'd be great to have some completely ignorant fringe woman be on a ticket because she was a woman. And that's how thin their comprehension of what women bring to the table really was, because it's like her ovaries work, ergo let's put her on the table.
It's a really interesting theory. And you said Robert Downey Jr., which you just defamed, a great actor. You meant Morton Downey Jr. Yeah, no, but it's fine. No, but yeah, I think it's actually, I think I probably disagree a little bit, just in terms of that it's more the media, leading these candidates, like the media, the right-wing media kind of creating a space for Sarah Palin, for John McCain to pick her. And I still think that that's really true. There is nothing on the left or in progressive media or what you call mainstream media or corporate media that can in any way compare to right-wing media. I mean, just the idea, that phrase, real American, it's not insulting. It's just stupid. It doesn't make any sense at all. We are such a diverse country.
Right. But it does to the mindset that believes that it is a population who owns the rights of the Constitution, and then everybody else has to beg for them or fight for them or go to court for them. And that's, I said that in the debate that you saw. I was like, look, that has been a paradigm that has been real in our country because we have allowed our institutions to behave in a certain way in which they value certain kinds of Americans way more than others. And then when there's a problem, they go to court and the court says, no, you're really supposed to treat everybody equally. And every different group that got maligned by our institutions eventually ended up at the Supreme Court and said, what about us, our LGBTQ brothers or transgender or whatever, all these different groups. And it's like, look, we should stop begging the Supreme Court to tell people that we all have the same rights. We've said it over and over again. And so we're no longer asking. We're simply stating that everybody's equal and that's the way our institutions are going to be. And that's the way our policing is going to be. And if you can't get with that program, you got to go. Because the rest of us are in full agreement about that. It's the folks that say, oh, no, I have to have a superior status to you because I'm an owner and this country was really made for me. And you guys get rights just because, you're here and okay. And aren't we nice for getting them to you? Nuh-uh. See, that's what's up. And so that's what Black Lives Matter movement is really about. It's not saying Black Lives Matter. It's saying Black Lives Matter as much as everybody else's lives, right? And we're no longer going to accept a tacit and sort of perhaps even a subconscious assumption that a greater deference or care or carefulness is owed to one population than another. We're just not
so well said. And you said that in the debate and it's so much harder to do in the time that you're given, but you did a great job in the debate last night, which I do want to talk about, but let's just pick up where you left off there. Let's talk about your Black life. You have a really unique life because you were born in, I think, Turkey. You mentioned earlier your dad was a foreign diplomat, foreign service, and you spent a lot of time as a child growing up in other countries, which I imagine gives you a very different experience as a person of color. And we can also talk about just being a woman. But how did your experience as a Black woman, as a Black girl, influence where you are at today? How much has that meant to you and dictated the choices, the experiences you've had?
Oh, I mean, it's obviously extraordinarily impactful. I mean, we are all deeply impacted by the good things and the bad things of our childhood. The traumas, affect us and change our behaviors going forward. I think what's interesting about having been born overseas is that I was not, I was born in the Middle East. I was born in Turkey, then we lived in Morocco, and then we lived in Syria. I mean, so I was around people who were basically brown. I mean, I don't look a whole lot different than them, but I knew I was being treated very differently than the people around me, not because of my color, but because of my status and our family status as a US diplomatic family, right? So we had special status going into the airports. We had people who worked as domestics in the house. We had a driver. We had these things that were pertinent to the role of a diplomat, which was a dignitary functionally. And so my sense of my specialness was that I was American, and it was always positive. It was a positive thing to be American. I didn't know exactly what that meant, other than going to grandma's from, every couple of summers and like suffering, Kansas City heat and whatever. But I didn't know that. I just thought America was like being, I have a passbook to Disneyland. Like, okay, I'm special that way. It wasn't until my parents divorced, and it was such a hard shock on the system. I was living in Damascus, Syria, right, with my brother. And then one day we're on a plane to Oakland, California. And we're saying, hey, family's falling apart and mom's got to go back to school. And
How old were you?
I was 6.
Oh, wow.
And, I'd already had some traumas because leaving my nanny and from Turkey was already hard enough. Like I had gone through these deep emotional separation issues because, every time you move, you leave behind. And back then they didn't have phones or internet. I mean, they had phones, but they have internet and, you're not going to stay in touch with these people. And so when I came to California, the first experience I had with racism was my grandmother's fear that I didn't understand I was Black. My
grandmother had a concern that you didn't understand your Blackness.
Yes, because my grandmother was from New Orleans, Louisiana, and she was, I guess you would call it, nowadays we would just say mixed. Back then it would be like quadroon or octoroon, whatever. She's a very fair-skinned Black woman whose father was white. And my grandmother was living in Oakland, California, amongst a population, many of whom were immigrants from Louisiana. So they had these deep South attitudes. And it kind of disturbed my grandmother that I didn't know I was Black, and my mother was trying to appease her mom, but also try to help me to understand what that meant. And of course, it just went completely over my head. But then I was put in at the time I was put into a French immersion school. I know this is complicated, but because I had learned to read and write in French, because in Morocco and in Syria, we didn't have American schools at the time, so we went to the French school. So I spoke fluent French and fluent Arabic and sort of pidgin English, and I wrote English like I thought it was to be written in French. So I was behind academically, not because I was intellectually behind, but because I just didn't have the tools. So I'm in this French school. We're taking buses all over the Bay Area trying to get myself squared away. And then right at like the worst moment, Roots comes out.
Wow.
And you want to talk about a psychological trauma on a child. Because by nature, I am intolerant of suffering. I am just by nature that way. The first time I actually saw TV, my mom had put me and my brother in the room, and we were watching a commercial, and it was a Cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs commercial. I will always remember that. And I'm literally get up and I run over to the kitchen. It's like, mommy, there's a bird in the cage and they're hurting the bird and we gotta go get the bird. And my mom is trying to explain to me that it's not real. Not real. This is all fake. This is all fake. And I'm like, okay, well, I guess, okay, fine. It's all pretend. That's what's her word. It's all pretend. It's all pretend. And so she sits us in front of TV, and naturally my brother gets curious and he starts to turn the channels. And so over that period of time, we saw a lot of different stuff, and we all thought that it was all pretend. And then one day, a Holocaust documentary comes on TV. Mind you, I'm 6 and already traumatized in all kinds of other ways. And I see this, and my brother is like getting upset, and I'm like, it's all pretend. Mommy says it's all pretend. It's not real. It's not true. Right? So my brother literally starts arguing with me, because that's kind of like our nature. And I'm telling him it's not real. Mommy says it's pretend. And so finally my brother goes out and gets my mom, and my mom tries to proceed to tell me this was in fact real. This was documentary and history. And of course I break into complete hysterics, inconsolable crying. Couldn't understand how something like that could be done to a kid. And more than anything, too angry for words that I couldn't fix it. I was inconsolable for days after that, because I just couldn't get out of my mind that there was nothing I could do to make this right. And I would go back to my mom and say, you sure we can't invite them here? Can't they stay here? And she just kept trying to tell me it happened so long ago. And I just couldn't process it. So that was kind of my nature. I just was hardwired from childhood to be just totally intolerant of hurting people. If you're hurting somebody, I'm coming for you. That's just.
I think I found out why we connected. I'm the same.
That's it. So when Roots came out,
yeah,
and they were whipping that guy, oh my God.
Yeah,
complete trauma.
That's a really fascinating kind of origin story or evolution for you as a child, which explains, I think, a lot of why you have made the choices that you've made in your life and your career, and obviously why you're running for Congress. But let's stick with your biography, with your life experience. I mean, you went to undergrad in California, where you were in high school as well, UC Davis, is that right?
That's right. That's right.
What did you study there, and why?
I started out as a pre-med. I thought I was going to be a doctor. And from the time I was a child, I thought I was going to be a doctor. Good. I want to help people. I just didn't like the human body all that much. I mean, unless it was hot. I just really didn't want to, it just was not all that interesting to me. Right. So I realized maybe doctor's not it. But I was a little bit adrift when I was in, as to what I should do with myself. Sure. So I majored in rhetoric and communication, principally because I had such a natural comfort with public speaking and with persuading people. Because I grew up in constant argument with my brother, right? So I was developing syllogisms and tactics in my head from infancy. And so I majored in that because it felt comfortable and natural to me, but I didn't know what I wanted to do with that. I'm super passionate about sports, so I wanted to go into sports casting, especially football, and they just didn't have opportunities for women other than, and even back then there was no opportunities. And then it sort of evolved to sort of sideline commentary, but not
Right. Yeah.
actually commenting on the sport itself. And then we're slowly making
Still, I mean, still extremely limited
extremely
for
limited.
women, female broadcasters and anchors in sports. I mean, they've made
Right.
major strides in the last few years. But yeah, go ahead. So sports
So
broadcasting.
I did my undergrad, and I was a little bit at sixes and sevens after that, and I sort of stumbled into an opportunity to go to grad school in that same area, and the university, the people of the state of California funded me, so that was fantastic. And then right around then, Rodney King happened, right? One of those things that just is like, oh my, this
93, I think, or 92. Yeah.
yeah, right in there. And so what happened was, no, I think it was 90, 91. It was even a little bit before that. But
Looking
anyway,
up.
I just remember thinking, I'm screaming at the television. I'm like, what are you doing? You got to ask this. And I'm sitting here in just such a constant state of like, you kidding me? This is crazy. And so and I had one of these epiphanies, like, you know what? I think I would do a better job prosecuting than that person is right now. I think I'd do a better job of it. And in that moment, I had an epiphany. I had like a road to Damascus moment. I was like, aha, I'm going to be a lawyer. And from that point on, like my whole personality just shifted. It was like a black and white. One day I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do. Next day I was like, I'm going to be a lawyer. That's it. And so I put all this energy and passion into getting to law school, and I did. What I failed to do was plan on how to pay for it. Totally different thing. I ended up taking out huge loans, like so many of our students do. I mean, I took massive loans to get through law school. And it was in law school that I got exposed to litigating and started to feel, I was a moot court champion. I know that doesn't surprise you. But that just kind of really natural to me. And then another movie came out called A Few Good Men. And I'm
Wow.
like,
I see what, yeah, I see what it's now you can see things unfolding for young Pam Keith and why you took the direction you did. Rodney King, I just looked up that the beating of Rodney King was in 91.
yeah.
And so that's so fascinating. So you see this injustice. We all saw it on video. And then that's
That was it
steers
for me.
you towards the law. You go to law school then.
That's right. I go to law school at Boston College, other side of the country. If you want to know why I chose Boston College, first of all, they were the first law school to respond at all. And they said yes. And once you get once you know that all that work that you put in has come to fruition, you kind of develop sort of an emotional security. But it also had a Division I football team, which was really important to me because I keep telling you, I'm a huge football fan.
Right.
And it was also a totally different experience than a huge state university in California. Boston College is this private, parochial, Jesuit law school in Massachusetts. So it's like 180. And I wanted to experience and explore different things. So it was a good fit for me that way. The weather was not a good fit for me. Failed to take that into consideration.
The Northeast
but I managed to tough it out. And when this whole Navy JAG thing came into my consciousness, keep in mind that, I grew up in a household where my father was one of the first 5 Black officers on the USS Midway, right? Like my dad was a naval officer. That's how he paid for his college education. And, he went to the University of Kansas because the University of Missouri was still segregated. So, my dad was proud of his Navy service. He was so proud of it, and it helped prepare him to go into the Foreign Service. And it was in traveling that he decided that he really wanted to do something involving international relations. And so I grew, my dad and my mom got married in his dress whites with the swords and all of that. And so I've always had this nostalgia. My dad would tell me stories about the Navy all the time. So I had this nostalgia towards the Navy. And then this movie comes out, and I'm like, ooh, I could do that. Right. And I could do the prosecuting, and I could do the criminal stuff, and I could do it in uniform and travel the world and serve my country, which meant so much to me. And so that's why I made the choice to go into the JAG Corps, and truly had a wonderful experience in that.
So, yeah, so you got your master's degree in 92 at Boston College.
No, at Davis. I went to BC Law School.
Got it. And then, so wait, you have a bachelor's, a master's, and a JD, a legal, wow, went to law school. Okay, so then you go into the Navy and you become a JAG officer. What kind of cases do you work on?
Well, when you're a baby lawyer, they just want to kind of see like, how do you handle yourself in court? Because we have a lot of court martials, right? And so most of the courts martials in the Navy are for failure to show up for the gig. We have ships that deploy, and everybody on the ship is extremely important. So if you miss ship's movement, you're going to get court-martialed.
Wow.
If you, right, because the Navy is different than the Army and the other services that way. The Navy is the only service that court martials for unauthorized absence like that. And sometimes sometimes if it's not ship's movement that you miss, you just go UA. We call it unauthorized absence. There's a lot of those. Are the first ones you take. Then you take sort of minor drugs, and then it starts to work its way up into more and more serious things. Because they had such a backlog when my class came in, because there had been some moratorium on justice school classes for a while because of budget or whatever. And so they had this they had this backlog. And so I was just like drinking from a fire hose. And in the Navy, we have defense counsel represent in criminal, which is, courts martial, but it also represents an administrative. If you have the potential of losing your GI Bill or your VA benefits or anything, or what we call bad paper. So if you go out normally, you're honorably discharged. But if there's some reason they're kicking you out, it can be either honorable, other than honorable, which is you don't lose anything, but it's not good. Then there's, other than honorable, and then there's general under honorable conditions, which is kind of that middle thing. And other than honorable, you lose your VA, your GI, and all of that. And so you can be kicked out for other than honorable for patterns of misconduct, for other petty offenses. For example, if you get a DUI, for example, you could lose your, they can kick you out on that. So I was dealing with the sailors that weren't doing well to begin with. But then they had this thing called don't ask, don't tell. And that was a compromise position in which LGBT, well, we didn't have T back then, but gay and lesbian service members could be processed out of the military and be kicked out of their jobs if it became known that they were gay. And so I would represent them when this happened. Now, a lot of folks had been serving for a long time and nobody knew, and they were fantastic members of our services. But then this thing happened called the internet, and there was this thing that called chat rooms. And people didn't understand and weren't sophisticated to understand what could be tracked and what could be seen. If they sent an email from the ship, who saw that? And so there were several cases that I dealt with people who basically got outed, not because they did or said anything crazy, but because the traffic that they involved in alerted someone. And, so that is why I am so passionately a pro LGBTQ rights. And I have been for so long, because the idea that somebody gets dehumanized, devalued, and disrespected and humiliated merely because of who they love is just so offensive to me, and it's so anathema to me that I'm like always on fire about it. Like, look, I don't care if you don't like their sexual preference. I don't like what you do. Your thing that turns me off. But I don't get to make decisions about the quality of your life because I'm uncomfortable with you. That is a warped way of thinking. And certainly when it comes to just fundamentals of being a citizen in our country. Like, I can choose to not just hang with you. If I don't like what you do, I don't hang with you. But I don't say, and you don't get to participate in our economy, and you don't get to be in our military, and I get to frown upon your lifestyle. You know whose lifestyle I frown upon? I frown upon Newt Gingrich's lifestyle. I frown upon Donald Trump's lifestyle. We're going to start making it on, my religion says that you don't get to participate in the economy in the way that I do because I frown upon your lifestyle. Well, let's go. Because there's a whole lot of things I frown upon, right? So that's kind of what generated that component of my advocacy.
Boy, this is such a better format for you than most interviews, and certainly that debate that took place last night.
Yeah. I mean, it just totally,
much less social media, because I've been seeing your tweets for years, and I've been prepping to interview you, but I am absolutely blown away talking to you. Really, just I'm a little emotional too, because it's like thinking about your journey and your life and your what I'm getting right now is brilliance mixed with a life experience and witnessing of injustice and understanding where the passion and the fire comes from for your wanting to run for Congress, for your wanting to fight injustice your whole life. And I gotta say, and I don't know how you want to handle this question, but I watched the entire debate that you did with your opponent Brian Mast, who's the incumbent, and you're running, of course, for people listening, in Florida's 18th Congressional District, and we can talk a little bit about the district if we have a few more minutes here. But I can't help, and I often think this, and I know that this, a lot of people, white men especially, get offended by this, but I don't really have a lot of patience for it, because it shows this kind of lack of empathy. But when I look at this guy, Brian Mast, who served in the Army, who was injured, I guess he won the Purple Heart. He also went to Harvard,
No,
but
he didn't go to Harvard.
he did not go to Harvard. I'm trying to,
No. He went to Harvard Extension and got a certificate.
Oh, what's that? Is that like?
That's like you pay for executive leadership,
Well, that makes sense to me, because my point
Yeah, he
was,
didn't go to Harvard.
my point was, and I was literally sitting here listening to you talk, and believe me, I heard every word, but I can multitask. And I was like, I got to look this guy up, his background, because with all due respect to the guy, I watched you both debate last night, and I think anybody can sound decent in a minute or two sound bites. And he didn't sound like a complete idiot, but he wasn't impressive to me. And I'm someone who can sound great and smart in 2 minutes on CNN or MSNBC. Anybody can, but I am sorry. Listening to you versus him, there is no comparison. And here's the difference. And people say this, and you can take this ball and run with it. But what a white man has to do to gain entry into into a new space, a new place, is it pales in comparison to what a woman does, much less a black person, much less a black woman. There can be no comparison in intelligence or life experience with this guy, Brian Mast, and you, Pam Keith. You are light years ahead. And my final point is, watching, like, the fact that there is even a question with you versus him, with anybody who watches you versus him or listens, frankly, to the last 20 minutes of our conversation, it's flabbergasting, because of what you've had to go through and what you have had to achieve in the education and all these degrees and all this experience that you've had, both the public and private sector. The idea that anybody would want him to represent them versus you, this guy is stone cold stupid, and you are absolutely brilliant. How do you look at generally, not Pam Keith versus Brian Mast, but like a white guy who has so much more opportunity just because of the vessel that he is in, versus, in your case, a black woman, what you have to overcome versus what he has to overcome and achieve? How do you frame that in a way that doesn't necessarily turn off white people, white constituents, white voters in your district, but helps them understand what I clearly understand, having just read certain books, much less lived life and watched it?
I want to educate your audience on a reality that took very, very long for me to come to peace with and understand. See, I got into politics for no other reason than I had another one of those, sort of like a road to Damascus aha epiphanies. It's like, look, I've been representing corporate America all these years. I've developed an expertise. I've proven myself in the most competitive crucibles of the law. Okay, yeah. But is that it? Is that what I'm supposed to do with my life? And I'm thinking to myself, you know what? To whom much is given, much is required. And so I would just as soon spend the rest of my life.
I'm sorry, but even using phrases like that is like impressive. Like, Brian Mast has never heard that phrase. Sorry to interrupt, but yes, go ahead.
So to me, it was like, look, I'm good if I just spend the rest of my life using my talents, my experience, and my passions to advocate for people and to put great ideas on the table and explore solutions and really build coalition, because I think I'm good at it. So I'm like, okay, let's do that for the rest of your life. You're good. But I didn't know anything about politics, because see, the thing is, this politics has nothing to do with policy. I know your listeners think it does, but it actually doesn't. I mean, if I had to break it down, politics is 10% policy, 90% patronage, right? And power.
What does patronage mean?
Patronage means I have something you want. I have an endorsement you want. I have money you want. I have a connect that you want. I have access that you want. It is about access to power. And so what becomes the top criteria for the internal machinations of politics is, are you going to be something that increases my power? Are you going to be something that threatens my power? Are you going to be a person that plays along with the power plan? Are you going to be somebody who obstructs the power plan? And the thing that is most noticeably different between Brian and myself is the degree to which Brian is absolutely a creature of his party, right? He never steps out of line with the party. And he doesn't, even though intellectually I have to know he thinks Donald Trump is an idiot, he will happily prostrate himself and say the most ridiculous things in support of other ridiculous things, because he sees himself as empowered by that structure. And that structure chose him because they knew they could control him. And so my walk in politics is the exact 180. Like, nobody invited me to run anything. I just Googled it and started to do it. And I put in 100,000 miles on my car, just going to clubs and caucuses and telling them my ideas and trying to win people over and building a little coalitions. And but that wasn't the traditional way into politics, right? The traditional way into politics is to be sponsored, to have your local party
Recruited
as your choice and all of these other things. And so because I did not come up in that way where I was already an elected official, I just went out into federal lane and said, hey, I think I should represent this district, or this state. Remember, my first run was for US Senate. I am the first Black woman to ever appear on a ballot for United States Senate in the history of the state of Florida. And I did that for one specific reason. I knew I was probably not going to win, but I wanted to push upon people's consciousness that I belonged there. And, look at my background, why not? I have a deep, nuanced understanding of diplomacy. I was in the military and I deployed into the Middle East. I know national security, and I held a top secret clearance as the first JAG to the Computer Network Security Task Force. So I know a lot about cybersecurity and national security. I went to big old law firms. I know lots about corporate America. I have an expertise in workplace law, unions, and employment law. That's what I know. Then I worked for the biggest energy producer and the biggest producer of clean and renewable energy in the country. So I know about solar and wind and how to do R&D and development. I know the risks of nuclear. And then, I'm just this progressive, passionate female who knows what Black people endure. Like, I think I check all the boxes.
You forgot to mention that I think you speak like 3 languages.
Yeah, but
no, not, that would be something I would include. Like, most of us have none of the qualifications that you just mentioned. And you didn't even mention, oh, by the way, I speak 3 languages. It's.
Well, I don't know, it's not something whatever. Anyway,
please, don't be modest. Let's do the rest in Portuguese.
My road into politics was fraught, not because I'm not qualified, right? My road into politics was fraught because I thought wrong-headed about it. I thought, like, I make my case and people vote for me. And that's not how it works. In this country, it's about party structure and it's about getting party buy-in. And that's a much tougher nut to crack for someone like me, who is just always in the moment of what's going on, or talking to people, or can get so fiery about injustice or whatever. And I'm not, it's taken quite some time for me to comprehend and to bring to my team, to bring to my my campaign, people who are good at that important component, because I'm not, right? Like, I can read you chapter and verse on all kinds of novel ideas to fix really bad systemic problems, right? I can read you in on any topic. And you want to talk about what's going on with the Kashmir or the Kurds, I can. You want to talk about healthcare, I got you. You want to talk about guns, good. Let's talk about unions, I got it. But if you want me to figure out how to triangulate somebody's mood because they thought I wasn't friendly enough at the last leadership conference, I'm like, I got nothing.
It's so awesome and honest and great. All right. I want to do part 2, is if we can. I also thinking, I'm thinking I've got to get you in front of a whole bunch of people, and watch them have their minds blown listening to you, and maybe, ask some questions. So maybe we could do like a virtual fundraiser for you.
I'm always open. I totally love that.
But let me just ask you before we go, just about your district and about your weird effing state and your weird district, because your district in itself is strange in terms of the way it's flip-flop between Democrat and Republican. So to the point of what you said about people don't care as much about policy as they do patronage and so on. But how do you win Florida 18? Tell me about this district, because it seems like it's really weird. Again, I said weird district, weird state. It's hard for most of us to understand the United States of Florida, much less your district.
It is exactly that, right? So Florida 18 is on the southeast coast of Florida. It is north of West Palm Beach, and it has a little component of Palm Beach. If you know anything about the intentions of the Republican legislature in Florida, you know they gerrymandered that thing to a fare thee well, right? So the whole state has been cut up into these wackadoodle looking districts where you have populations that are not necessarily homogenous or even similar thinking. And so what happens is that the northern part of Palm Beach County, think Mar-a-Lago. Mar-a-Lago is literally 5 minutes outside of my district. The southern part is Palm Beach County. It has a lot of gated communities, a lot of golf communities, a lot of retirees, a ton of very, very wealthy real estate, Stinger Island, Palm Beach Island. That's like where Tiger Woods and Michael Jordan, all those folks. Trump National is in my district, right? Like the actual golf course. So that is the northern part of Palm Beach County. Right next to it is Martin County. Martin County, think of it as very Trump red. It's not just red, it's super pro-gun red, and it's super like hardcore conservative red. But it has pockets of blue. It has a Latino population, a Hispanic population, which is wildly different than it is in Miami. In Miami, you get a whole bunch of Cubans. Here, you have immigrant Bolivians and immigrant Guatemalans who work in agriculture and kind of stay off the radar because it's an intermingled, documented and undocumented community. And so there's plenty of people who can vote, but they just kind of don't. And then on the northern side, you get St. Lucie County. And St. Lucie County is just really like blue-gray collar, right? It has like I said, the coastal part's super wealthy, but then the majority is blue-gray collar with this insular, traditional Black community, right? That's more like the South than think about. It's religious, it's contained, geographically contained. It's very distrustful of like politicians coming and going because they've seen it so much, right? And their community never seems to change. And so they're a little bit skeptical of all politicians, even Democratic politicians. And so I live in this Fort Pierce community. And the magic sauce about my district, which is why Obama won it, is that if this community, first of all, it's a voting community. And second of all, it accordions, it kind of comes in and out. If sometimes it'll come in a huge numbers and sometimes it won't. They will always vote well above 50%. If it votes at 62, that's probably normal. If it goes down about 50, that means it's been an off year. But it can come out at 65, 67, 69%. And when it does that, we flip the district. Because it's, like I said, it's consistent. So what happens from north to south is you have radically different kinds of appeals. And it takes a very unique candidate to appeal to the whole district. And that's why it keeps going back and forth so dramatically. So you think about somebody like Alan West, he represented my district. After him, it was Patrick Murphy, Democrat, represented my district. Then after him, it's Mast. And now it's going to be me because it does that. It's not so much swing as seesaw. 2/5 is Democratic, 2/5 is Republican, and 1/5 is non-party affiliated. Right?
Oh, it's really, really interesting. It's very, you just, explained it so well. But I mean, Alan West, Black man, military, but hardcore right winger, conspiracy theorist. And then now Brian Mast, who
right. Mast is a different flavor than West, but not by much. Right. And mind you, there's a third element here, Pete. We have one of those QAnon conspiracy theorists on our ballot who is running as an independent. So there's actually 2 Republicans on the ballot, one trying to be more wackadoodle than the other.
Oh, wow. And so is that man or woman that man or woman probably takes votes from him, not you, I would imagine.
Exactly. That guy is just, KW is the one who thinks that Patti LaBelle is part of the deep state and is being paid by George Soros to bring Barack Obama back to the White House. Like,
is that right?
Of nuts. Yes, but there's one issue on which KW has a legitimate ability to pull votes from Brian, and that is on guns. Because for a hot second, Brian tried to find himself to be bipartisan because he can't quite decide whether he's bipartisan or pro-Trump because he kind of has to be both. So for about half minute right after Parkland, because Parkland's like 45 minutes south of us, Brian comes out and says, I favor an AR-15 ban. I use these weapons in combat, and they're really not right for civilian use. Boy, did he piss off the Second Amendment people. So that year he got primaried by two guys who between the two of them came away with about 15,000 votes, right? But they were stupid because they ran in the primary against an incumbent Republican in a district that's got a lot of Republican money. They were never going to break through that way. The 15,000 votes would have made a difference in some other context. Now you take KW Miller, not that stupid, crazy, but not stupid. He says, I'm not going to run against you in a primary. Since Florida is a closed primary state, if I'm an independent, if I'm a non-party, I automatically go to the November ballot.
Right.
So Miller is on the November ballot as an independent. He's a lifelong Republican, but he's an independent. And he will be pulling those crazy gun folks all the way over to him. And again, 10, 15,000 votes is curtains for Brian. It's curtains for Brian.
That's a really interesting issue. Last question though for you. And by the way, PamKeithFL.com. All the links are in my show notes, and, donate to her. I'll let you, City ask if anybody listening can help you in any way in your district. But how has COVID played out in your district and as an election issue, as a campaign issue? We've all heard about Florida and how hard you've been hit.
Right, it's political sea change, right? Like at the beginning of this cycle, the entire party believed this district was not winnable. And the reason it was not winnable to them is
the entire Democratic Party.
Yes, and they picked the wrong mix. I mean, again, it's a tough thing to do, to appeal to all three parts of the county, and very few people would, right? But what happened was the majority of the population is just sort of center right, and so they picked candidates that they thought would appeal to that group. But there were bad matchups to Brian, because Brian, like combat wounded, he wraps himself up in the flag and claims that all Democrats are not patriotic. He sure the hell can't do that to me. So, I match him in a way that the previous candidates did not. But at the beginning, the party just threw up its hands and said, we lost by 8 points, we can't win it, right? But the problem is, all of a sudden, coronavirus creates this complete sea change. And the first thing that it does is, if the first place it truly hits is New York, right? And Trump's response to New York was just so offensive and so horrible. And you think of these people are New Yorkers, New Jersey, Connecticut. That's where they come from. These are their families, their children, their grandchildren. And he's doing this to them. So that starts to really tip people away from Trump. Although there was some, well, maybe we like Mast, right? And then the response in Florida started to get worse and worse and worse. And of course, we're still one of the worst in the country. And so that's having real impact. And then, Trump throws out, hey, cuts to payroll taxes, cuts to Social Security and Medicare. There's a population that you are not going to please with something like that. I mean, we are the 6th most senior congressional district in the country. So if you are going to take the knife to seniors, you are not going to do well in this district. And to make that point as starkly as I can, Hillary lost people over 65 in my district by 9 points. Joe is leading that same population by 8 points. That is a 17-point turnaround in one presidential cycle. And that's how stark it is. And that's how winnable the seat is. You cannot use what happened last cycle as a bellwether as to what's going to happen here. Just deal with the fact that you have an even distribution of Democrats, Republicans, non-party voters, and the side that wins is the side with the momentum and the strongest candidate. Stop being risk averse about that. And that's really it. And there's another component that I think your listeners really need to understand about this district. The congressional delegation of Florida is currently controlled by Republicans by 1 seat. If it goes to 1 seat blue, the Democrats have control of the delegation, which is critical because that's the control of the electors that get sent to the Electoral College. So if the Republican delegation is in control, they send Republican electors to the Electoral College. If the Democratic delegation is in control, they send Democratic electors to. And that's why this is what we call a super seat. There was just an article out. I can share it with you. I think I shared it with you last night. This seat not only has the population that actually flips Florida from red to blue, but it also has the seat that flips the delegation from red to blue. And that means that not only do you win the seat in the 29 electoral votes, but the electors are chosen by the Democrats and not the Republicans. And so all of these shenanigans that the GOP are planning come to a dead stop.
So you just made the case for everybody listening, the vast majority of which I'm sure do not live in your district, to donate to your campaign? Does money matter at this point with 20 days left? Do you need money?
Oh, absolutely. Every dime counts.
Okay.
Every dime counts. And, you know, let's be honest, I'm not on red to blue yet. I can't understand why this district was on red to blue in 2018 and 2016.
Wait, what does that mean?
Red to blue is the Democratic Party's plan, you know, program to flip seats, and they haven't put this district on that plan yet. Although we're hopeful that we can get them there 20 days out. But you know, that puts me in a very, very tough position in terms of bringing money to the table to compete with the Republican.
Okay.
Brian has all the money he needs because he's, like I said, he's the party creature and he does exactly what they want. But I'm trying to ring the alarm throughout the, you know, the whole atmosphere, right? Like, guys, what's going on with Florida? I mean, I think to some extent that's reflective of some executive decisions that Florida's not winnable because of what happened in 2018, and they're going to focus on Texas. And I'm like, ooh, man, are you really going to sacrifice Florida to pour into Texas? Really? Like, we lost 2018 by 38,000 votes, which, by the way, is less than the underperformance in this district. Like, if we had done better here, Florida would have gone blue. We'd had a blue, you know, governor and a blue senator. Like, we failed here. And think about Florida. It's blue on the bottom. It's red on the top. It's purple in the middle. They cancel each other out. It's these onesies and twosies off to the side that break the tie. And Florida 18 breaks Florida's tie. And that's why it's a super seat, and that's why it's the best congressional race in America to invest in.
PamKeithFL.com, PamKeithFL.com. Go donate right now. $5, $10, $1 billion. If anybody has $1 billion.
No amount is too small.
Unfortunately, that's allowed, I think.
Right.
At Pam Keith. Go ahead.
Yeah, and let me tell you, if you cannot give money, give time. Give time, because we can use you on text to voter. We can use you on virtual phone bank. We can use you in other ways. We want to build an army of about 100 people who give about 4 hours a day to texting and calling. If you have 4 hours, or you and your spouse or your significant, your roommate are willing to divide 2 hours each, we're going to be putting up a link for you to sign up and help with manpower, because that manpower helps us to get directly to voters that are low propensity voters. We know the game here is not convincing people who think Trump is great to change their minds, right? That is not the game. The game is to turn out these low propensity voters by letting them know that there's a candidate out here who sees them, who gets them, who has empathy and intelligence and compassion, and wants to talk about the truth that coronavirus exposed, didn't create. And we can use help with that.
PamKeithFL.com. Follow her on Twitter as well, and I hope that you can join me again as often as you can. I mean, I'm simply at PamKeithFL on Twitter. I'm simply blown away. I'm just blown away by this conversation, your brilliance, your ability to communicate, and the way that you've just communicated, your experience with. I mean, watching that debate, boy, it just doesn't. Those televised debates, I watched the whole thing.
They don't do it.
It just doesn't. It can't. It doesn't matter who you are, because it cannot accommodate someone like your brilliance. That's why a longer form conversation like this one is just a game changer. And so I'm going to post this everywhere that I'm going to put it on YouTube. I'm going to put it on Twitter, on Instagram, everything. And I'm all in for Pam Keith.
Thank you so much, Pete. This is, I mean, aside from it just being a personal delight, I sincerely appreciate, because I know the kind of folks that you know that listen and pay attention to you, and hopefully they get the semaphore flag signal, like, hello, help Florida 18, you know, like, it's been a real uphill climb to try to get buy-in from the party structure that this is a good investment.
Has the party structure met you? Good Lord. I mean, I can't imagine. I understand that resources are limited and they try to go where
they're
they
not actually all that limited.
I would think they're not as much this time around. I mean, it seems like there's a lot
it's not
of money.
Limited this time. You know, if you know the answer, you tell me. Right? I can either gnash my teeth in frustration or keep fighting with everything I've got.
I know the answer. It's Pam Keith. Thank you, Pam.
Thank you so much, Pete, for having me.